Doctors are still analyzing what exactly happened on Election Day and what went wrong. As we know, just about every poll showed Hillary Clinton in the lead, but as we know, that was a poll, not the reality. She won the popular vote, but the national polls, in fact, weren't far off on that front, but Trump's electoral college victory, that caught many by surprise, and many factors contributed to it. A new study by the American Association for Public Opinion Research has attempted to get to the bottom of it, and our next guest contributed to that report, Dr. Lee Miringoff. He's an assistant professor of political science at Marist, and he's a director of the Marist Institute for Public Opinion. Doctor, as always, good talking to you.
My pleasure, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It was really interesting, the report, because as I said off the top, on the national front, you guys were pretty close. But it seemingly was those Rust Belt states that really broke late in the game. Explain how the Pennsylvanias, the Wisconsins, the Michigans, how everybody got them wrong.
Well, it wasn't everybody, and I think you're correct in identifying that the national polls were generally okay. So it wasn't, by any stretch of the imagination, a catastrophic year for the polling community. In fact, the national polls were better than they've been. Our poll at Marist had a 1-point Clinton advantage in the popular vote, and obviously she won by 2 points, so that's certainly very close and very accurate. The state polls presented a separate set of problems, as you correctly identify, talking about the Electoral College, talking about the Rust Belt states. But here's where I take some issue with the report itself. There were a limited quantity and quality of polls taken after the Comey letter. Clinton's numbers were already on the decline in the national polls, which were mostly done very close to the election. But the state polls, a lot of them that were considered in the report, were actually done over a 2-week period, not that last week when the numbers had already tightened. So the logic is that they might be more off. I think they were right in the time they were conducted, but I think by including those from such a wide period and taking multiple polls from the same organization, which is dangerous because if that organization didn't do well, now you're counting them even 2 or 3 times. So I think the committee, in its interest to have enough polls, may have misdirected the conclusion that, in fact, the state polls were as misleading. I'm not so sure that was the correct conclusion. I think they're right about the national. I did not like the conclusion when it came to the state polls myself.
One of those conclusions, though, is, and you just touched on it, there was a big swing in the last few days. And also the report said that some Trump voters weren't volunteering who they were voting for on the phone, only after did they make that declaration. Why do you think the switch? Was it the Comey letter? Could we put our finger on why people either changed their minds in the last 72, 96 hours? Why?
Well, I mean, first of all, you were dealing with an historic situation where you had the 2 most unpopular candidates in our nation's history running against each other. So there was a real, hold your nose, pull a lever kind of effect. And we knew that the person who was in the center of the news going into that last couple days was going to suffer. And that was Hillary Clinton and the emails as a result of the Comey letter. What we have then is an election that's getting closer, and we have an election where the late deciders are breaking for Trump. And when you had a voter who didn't like either of the candidates, they tended to go for Trump, particularly in those Rust Belt states that you identified. Now, here's the big hidden secret in all of this. The polls were not driving the narrative. There were forecasting probability models that were out there. The 538s of the world, the Huffington Posts of the world, the Real Clear Politics, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they all had what Nate Silver had 4 years ago. They all tried to do something that would resemble that. They were forecasting. Polls measure. And we were accurate, I think, generally in the polling community in measuring this race accurately. But the forecasters were really driving the narrative. And I think that was what was going on this past November. That's what the surprise was. Everybody expected Hillary Clinton to win, and obviously she did not, at least in the Electoral College.
Lee, in terms of some of the other post-mortem here, they said that there was an underrepresentation of non-college graduates. And I wonder if any of that also has to do with, are we still polling people with landlines and not cell phones? Talk about some of the methodologies that obviously weren't right from the sampling and how they did it.
Yeah, I know that after the election, there was a lot of readjusting, relooking, and reexamining of their data. And some people felt that weighting by education, because of the way we understood this electorate to be about Trump and Clinton, and people, with lower levels of education, particularly in the Rust Belt, were more likely to vote, whites were, for Trump. And I think those pollsters who are going to now take in their model the difference in education and readjust that and weight it to the electorate we just had are going to find themselves with probably a real problem on their hands in 4 years. We did not weight by education, and our numbers were spot on. I don't think that was the problem in this election, and neither, you alluded to either earlier, the fact that some people may not have been eager to come forward. People who support a candidate are more than eager to tell us that. So when we do a poll of 1,000 voters nationwide and come up within 1% of the final result, then you know that there's something good about that methodology, because it seems like a real daunting task. And I think most of the pollsters were able to do that, except there were some experimental things going on. Some folks are trying, because it's costing more and more to do these polls accurately and scientifically. People were trying some new methodologies, experimental methodologies, and I think those have to be proven before they're counted on an equal par with the more traditional scientific, rigorous polls. And right now, they're all sort of thrown into the soup as just another ingredient and get averaged in with the rest. And I think that was also some of the confusion that was a result of this election.
Dr. Miringoff, as always, I really appreciate the time. Really interesting report here. Again, thank you.
Yeah.
Coming up next, everybody, we'll take a look at some local headlines. So please stick around.